Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dance History. And I hope you have a great summer and this COVID business is over soon because I'm sure you're all sick of it, staying in and being confined, right? So, good time to take a class, though. So, that's good. All right, let's get right down to business. Today, I am lecturing from chapters 1 to 5. All right. Now, it will be really helpful if you do read the actual chapters beforehand, because of course I can't lecture on every single word in every chapter. So I'm just picking out the important things. And if you read the chapters, you'll have a background and know what I'm talking about. Okay, so that will be very helpful. All right, I'm going to start with the idea that we are all dancers. And you might be scoffing, saying, oh no, you don't know me, I have 2 left feet. Well, here's the thing. They have done a lot of studies on pregnant women, and they've done ultrasounds and watching the fetus and watching the breathing and the heartbeat, et cetera, et cetera. And they have seen the fetus moving to the mother's heartbeat. Not only that, but in a rhythmical manner. Not kidding. So let's say here's the fetus, and the mother's heartbeat goes ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. And the fetus will move and respond to that heartbeat every time, you know. So we're already born with coordination and rhythm to a base sound, a basic sound. All right, so now let's say the baby gets born, right? And if you guys can imagine, or if you've ever seen a newborn baby, they squiggle a lot. So, you know, they're moving all over the place like this. And that may seem uncoordinated, but it is actually in a very coordinated manner. They're not going like this, you know, but they're doing everything at the same time. So it's very coordinated. All right, so now the baby gets a little bit bigger, and let's say they're in their crib after a nap and they woke up and they pull themselves up and they start going, oh, oh, oh. Well, they're dancing, they're moving their body and singing to a rhythm. And it's very natural. Nobody taught them that. Okay, now they're in the high chair and they're being fed. And you may have seen them take their fork or cup and go like this. Oh, 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 oh. You know, they don't do, oh, 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 oh. No, it's not sporadic. It's very rhythmical and natural. Okay. And then the babies are born, and little kids are often squirmy and they move around a lot. And they should be allowed to do that because their muscles are growing and they need to move. Unfortunately, though, in our society, we literally smack that natural movement right out of our kids. You know, let's say a little kid is shopping with the mother or the father in a grocery store, and they're jumping up and down saying, Mom, what's that? What's that? I want that up there. And what do? Stop that. Stand up straight. Hold on to the cart. Don't, 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 don't. You know, and we literally train them this physical behavior in certain places, in public, et cetera, et cetera. And then they get into kindergarten, same thing. All right, guys, let's sit in a circle, crisscross, apple cross your legs. And then, okay, we're going to go out and play. So let's go single file, follow each other. And some kids are squirming and they're told to stop it, et cetera, et cetera. So our government does not realize the necessity of moving the physical body and how important it is. And we are all born with that natural ability to just move the body, right? Okay, so Then we grow up and again squirming in school, but we're constantly told by adults how to act physically, how we must present ourselves. So let's say if I'm teaching a dance class and I have my leg like way up in the piano and I'm saying, okay, hi guys, let me take attendance. That's no big deal. You know, nobody thinks anything of it. But if I'm teaching a dance history class and I'm up at the podium lecturing, if I put my leg up, people would think that's very weird. Oh my God, you know, what is she doing? She's crazy. So we are learned and taught certain physical behaviors for different situations. But predominantly our natural movement from day one is literally taken away from us. We're told that that's not correct or good, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So now the kids get older, and depending on what school they go to, because some schools do have the arts and some schools even have a little dance. But you know, if their parents don't have money, how can they afford to put their kids in these classes of the arts after? You know, so it really cuts off what part of society can learn the arts and what part of society is not allowed to learn the arts. Because believe it or not, we are one of the only civilized country whose government does not support the arts, and therefore we do not have the arts in school. I mean, a little neighbor of mine just recently told me that last year their PE classes went from twice a week to once a week. Once a week. I mean, they should be having this every day, and also the arts every day. So it's pretty tough, you know, it's pretty tough. All right. So we've got this initial desire to move, to stretch our bodies. I mean, guys, really, listen. If we were not meant to move our bodies, we would all probably be just a big head with a big brain, right? But no, other countries recognize this and they have all the arts in all their schools from day one. And there's also no discrepancy in either gender dancing. I mean, people don't think that a man who's a professional ballet dancer is a weirdo. Like in our country, unfortunately, those beliefs still occur. And it's just because of exposure. Americans are not exposed to the art form of dance. Now, today there's a little bit more out there because of TV shows, but you know, most Americans are going to bypass that channel and find something else. Why? Because they're ignorant about dance. They know nothing about it, so they're not interested in it. You have to know about something and be introduced to it and experience it a little bit before you can decide that you're not into it. All right. So that's the problem with our country. Okay. So we are all born with natural movement. We're all dancers. We're all born. Now, speaking of dance, I know you all know what it is, but I want to give a definition. And that is that dance is the making of movement for its own sake. So dance is the making of movement for its own sake. All right, so 99% of our movement during the day is to perform what we call pedestrian tasks or functions. So you get up, you brush your teeth, you take a shower, you make your bed. All that movement would be under pedestrian movement because it doesn't take training. I mean, you know, everybody moves things to perform a function or complete a task, right? However, dancing You're not completing a function or a task. You're moving just for the sake of moving because it feels so good, right? So that's how we define movement as opposed to pedestrian normal movement, okay? All right, and we see that early on, I mean, our book starts early on, that we've got dance found in all societies known to man. Dance has been found. Now imagine this. Think of different tribes in different parts of the world who have never heard of each other, yet they have these same things in common, that for some reason they move and dance. And no one, they didn't learn it from another country or another tribe somewhere. It's innate. It's in us. It's innate. And as much as it's going to be squished down, you will see as we go along with our history, and denied, it keeps popping up again. It keeps coming up over and over again because it's so natural and so innate to move our bodies. Okay. All right. Some people think that you need music to dance, but you do not. You can make a little dance right here and now with no music whatsoever. Okay. Most of our dance is done to music, though, but you don't need it to make dance. Let's see. Dance also is a way of communicating. It's a way of communicating with our body. All humans have similar ways of communicating. And without understanding the language, we understand what they mean. Now, this is early on, it was called pantomime or the art of excitation. It's just, movement of the body. If somebody, let's say you're in a classroom and somebody came in and said, "You guys, you're the luckiest class in the college because you guys have all just won the lottery." And all the movement would be, yes, up and happy, all right. And you'd probably be jumping up and down, jump up on your desk, So that movement of up and out is usually happy and exhilarating. And you can read that from a person, even if you don't know the language. Now, same is true with the opposite situation. Let's say that, you're in a classroom. Now, this is just pretend, okay? It's not a real situation. You were in a classroom and somebody came in who was very threatening and scary. And our first physical reaction would probably be something like this. So naturally, what we do is we tend to cave in and lift our shoulders in fear and kind of tuck our bodies. And that's very natural. You don't stop and think that with your brain. You don't stop and say, "Oh my, there's a scary man at the door, so I think I will tuck my body, lift my shoulders, and look scared." You don't think of it. It just happens. And that too is universal movement that we understand. Okay? If I went like this, well, you would know what I meant. I'm hungry. Are you hungry? Come on, let's go eat. That kind of thing. So gesticulation of the body, or otherwise known as pantomime, has existed for a very long time, and we're going to get into that a little bit later from chapter 4 too. All right, so going on with chapter 1, we have, think of the world as west and east. All right. Now, there's no exact line drawn down the middle. Just think of the western side of the world and the eastern side of the world. All right. In the Western side of the world, we dance and think of dance very differently than those in the East. And we're going to find out why. But in Western dance, in the Western world, dance is more for entertainment, and its ability to exist depends on paying audience members. Okay. It's not something that the whole culture does, especially professionally, that is. But it is done for fun, for entertainment, and Westerners are usually known too in dance for novelty, for finding new ways of expressing dance, okay, for creating new things. Typical Western, right? Always out with the old and in with the new. Now, there's pros and cons to that. We often throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. But at any rate, quest for novelty, quest for newness. Now, dance in the East is usually very closely linked with religion, with royal ceremonies, and with tribal rituals. So we call that the 3 R's. Eastern dance, a long time ago, connected to dance in the way of religious services or royal ceremonies or tribal rituals. Okay, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. Well, it makes one think, how did dance grow different in the West than the East? Dance in the East has remained closely linked with tradition, and they have dances that are thousands and thousands of years old that they still pass down from generation to generation. Well, how come we don't have that? Well, we'll see in chapter 4. Again, that's probably the most important chapter in the book. All right, so differences between Eastern and Western dance. We'll get into that a little bit more too. Okay, I want to talk about the dominant form of dance in America. And the dominant form of dance in our country is jazz dance. Now, you have to remember that jazz dance is like a big umbrella, and it covers inside many other forms of jazz dance. So that's why it's the most dominant, whereas ballet is ballet is ballet, et cetera, et cetera. So jazz dance has very interesting roots, very parallel and similar to jazz music. So jazz dance was started from Africans when they were forced here, African slaves, and their movement. And then it was copied by people here, and it was further developed, and it kept developing into different things. But it started in the same area down south, then spread to New Orleans and through the rest of the country, and eventually throughout the world. So jazz dance has evolved and changed and is always evolving and changing. So probably the first time most Americans, I would say, got into jazz dance was probably in the 70s during disco. But even before that, we had minstrel dance, we had burlesque dance, we had variety theater dance. We had all these dance styles happening, but they all fall under jazz. Okay, the many evolvements of jazz dance. And when it got to disco, it became so popular that it extended through other places in the world. And so now we have a Western kind of dance happening in other parts of the world with disco. Okay. And Broadway dance, all those other styles are under the jazz umbrella, which makes it, the biggest, holds all these different art forms. of dance. And not only did jazz spread, but we have ballet, hip hop, modern dance. A lot of dance styles have traveled to eastern parts of the world. China has an incredibly beautiful ballet company, and Japan has everything. They have ballet, modern, jazz, hip hop, tap, you name it. They do a lot of Western dance styles. Okay. All right, so jazz is the dominant dance style in America. All right. And let's see. Okay, yeah, let's talk about culture. If you're going to go visit another country, I mean, you can buy those books that say where to go sightsee, etc. But you'll have a much better idea of the people in that country if you look up what their arts are, what they're into. Look up the top 10 songs in that country. Look up the top 10 books. Look up their latest architecture, their latest fashions. So if you look up the arts of these cultures, you'll have a much better understanding of the people and what they like, what they do. Okay? And so we say that the arts are a record of one's culture. They certainly are. They tell you about the people, not the places and the things so much, but the people, who they are, what they like, what kind of food, etc., etc. Okay. Now, in early anthropology, we had some Western anthropologists who went and studied different tribes, studied different people that we didn't know about. And unfortunately, those Westerners did not know anything about dance. So, for instance, when they went to study tribes and how they lived, when the tribes would start dancing, these Western anthropologists would put their books down or notes and go take a break. Because they might note that they're dancing, but that's all they would say. In their mind, it wasn't important. And so they didn't see the importance of it in these tribes' lives. And in their minds, they didn't connect it. So we have more now, but we didn't back then. I'm talking about 1920s, 30s, 40s. We didn't have a lot of information on dance in other parts of the world. Okay. Now, there is one anthropologist / dancer I would like to talk about, and her name is Pearl Primus. Let me just make sure I'm not jumping to the next chapter without telling you. Okay, yeah, just one more thing before I get to chapter 2. We'll get back to those anthropologists though, okay? So we see that early dance existed as rituals. And what is a ritual? A ritual is basically when people are placating to the gods, they're praying and asking for something. Typically with tribes, it would be about, please let there be rain so our crops can grow and we'll have food. Please let the sun shine to grow our crops, that kind of thing, right? But it could be about, let's say the chief of a tribe became very ill, okay? And in tribes, we have the men and women are separated as far as what they do ritual dances on. So women do rituals for anything about fertility, whether it be the growth of the food, crops, or the growth of a baby. Anything with the word fertility is done by women. The women also do dance rituals for anybody that's sick, praying for their men that go to war, like that kind of thing. And water is really important in women's rituals in a lot of different ways. So, and Luna, the full moon, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, men traditionally dance rituals for things like war and hunting and helping the tribe exist and be healthy, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So there are two different kinds of rituals. The first kind is called a specific ritual. And a specific ritual is something that happens once in a lifetime. So, for instance, you're born and you die. Okay, that happened once in that particular lifetime. Okay. Or you could say, you had a 10th birthday. Well, you have lots of birthdays, but you only have one 10-year-old birthday, right? Now, the second kind of ritual is called cyclical, meaning cycle, like a bicycle tire, like it's round and it's continuous over and over and over. So a cyclical ritual is one that happens more than one time. Even if it only happens twice, it would be a cyclical ritual because it happened more than once. Okay. So most of these rituals were part of tribes' daily living. And, it was also a way that they socially organized. I mean, they enjoyed each other and talked and prayed and got together, right? Just as you and I today might go out for dinner and go to a movie. I mean, it's not with everybody, of course, but tribes would do this as a way of socially organizing and playing also, okay? And another interesting thing about rituals is that these anthropologists have done many, many studies, and they have found 5 common denominators in rituals. Now, this always blows me away because you can take a tribe in New Zealand and then take a tribe in Africa, and they don't even know about each other. It's so early on, okay? And yet, they have these rituals that are extremely similar, extremely. So, the 5 elements that are characteristic in different rituals all over the world are these. Number 1, they all contain movement. Number 2, they all contain some kind of body decoration. I mean, it might be tattoo, war painting or tattoo painting, or it might be flowers that they put together and wear, okay, or it might be a certain type of clothing they wear for a certain ritual. The third one is sound. Rituals always include certain sounds for certain rituals. Okay, that was always important. The fourth one was a setting or a place. So, let's say women's rituals would often happen near water if there was water close by. The place in which a ritual took place, happened, was very important, okay, to all of these different tribes. And the last one is some kind of light. Now, we first imagine that to be fire, right? Tribes create fires. But it could also be men getting ready to go to war will have a ritual at high noon when the sun, the light, is at its hottest point, okay? It could be women having a fertility ritual at the full moon, okay, when it is most light. So some form of light was always a familiar characteristic in rituals too. But they all included movement. So from early on, dance has been present in every society known to man. Okay, that's very important. All right, let's see. Okay, this is starting from chapter 2, so you might want to mark the time of the tape here if you want to stop it for now or whatever. So chapter 2 goes more into rituals and more into the movement, like what kind of movement they do. And we're looking at 2 kinds of movement. The first kind, well, first I should tell you who did this. There was a historian, dance historian, whose name was Kurt Sachs, Curtsachs. And he gave us these adjectives to better describe what kind of dance he was talking about. And those adjectives are harmonious and ecstatic, right? So for harmonious movement, that would be movement that tribes usually did. And the movement is very natural. You don't have to be trained in this. It's, low to the ground. It's a relaxed back. Things like stomping and maybe shuffling, maybe little hops and jumps or a skip. I mean, very harmonious, low to the ground, natural movement. When they teach their rituals to generation after generation after generation, the kids are so used to watching these that they catch on immediately. All right. They are kept simple on purpose. They are kept simple because their ritual dance is a way of including everybody. This isn't a show or a performance they're putting on. The idea of dancing together is how they commune with one another. And so they keep them simple so everybody can partake, And then they can often get in the zone. You do a ritual dance long enough and you just become mesmerized and your body feels like it's moving on its own without you exerting any energy. And it's a wonderful place. I mean, you can get that in dance a lot. You have to, dance for long periods of time, but you can feel it in other things too. You can feel it when you swim laps. At first, it's very hard and you get tired, but if you push yourself to keep going, you start feeling exhilarated and it feels like your body's moving on its own without any effort from you. And it's just wonderful feeling. In football, basketball, anything physical, you can get this feeling if you do it enough. And our bodies release these hormones that just give us this wonderful feeling. It's like a natural high. If any of you have ever been to a rave dance, it's a similar thing, but without the ecstasy. No drugs. This is just a natural way of getting high. All right, so the tribal ritual dances often could get that feeling as well. All right. So harmonious dance, very natural. It's the kind of dance mostly found in tribal dance. There are a few exceptions, but mostly most tribes dance harmoniously, okay? Now, that's also attached to Eastern dance. Eastern dance is generally harmonious, even traditional Eastern dance, where they want to pass it down from generation to generation. It's usually very harmonious. Now, the opposite of that, ecstatic dance. ECSTAT, ECSTATIC, ecstatic dance. Okay? This is dance totally opposite harmonious. So Kurt Sachs gave us this word to describe what generally is found in Western dance. It is, it can start off slow, but it usually gets faster and faster and faster, and it can reach great heights. There's a lot of reaching up in the air. There's a lot of big leaps and jumps and trying to be airborne. And, in ecstatic dance, not everybody does it. Ecstatic dance is found usually in people that have dedicated their life to dance and have become professionals. It's not about communing with everybody together. It's about performing it for someone. After many years of training, you need training for this kind of dance. Whereas harmonious dance, you don't need any training. It's more natural. And harmonious dance would not be very good as a dance on stage because it's kept very simple and it's often very repetitive. So the audience would get very bored unless they're allowed to do it with them, and then they can get into that mesmerizing zone, right? Okay, so Western dance, very ecstatic, very fast, sharp. You need a lot of training to do it. Not everybody does it together. It is not passed down from generation to generation, and it often changes over time. Okay, so those are the two differences between harmonious and ecstatic. I want to talk quickly about some of the exceptional tribe dancing that we've found. So we have one African tribe called the Watusi tribe. And in their tribe, they actually do have ecstatic dance. So they're unusual. They do harmonious dance as well, but they are also known for their very, very high leaps and jumps, which is unusual for tribal dance, okay? And then there's another tribe called the Maasai tribe in Africa also. And they are known, especially the girls, for being the aggressors, basically. So their dance can be very ecstatic. And in the Maasai tribe, they used to have, what we would call initiation. When they were 14 years old, a boy and a girl would get together and they would have sex for the first time in front of their whole tribe. And I know to us that sounds crazy, whatever, but for them, they were celebrating their beginning of adulthood, okay? And they view the body very differently than we do in Western culture. And I might add, they view it in a more understanding way, in a more accepting way. They don't hide their bodies. Nudity is not uncommon. Having a sexual urge is not uncommon. It's not uncommon to act on it either. So when this girl and boy get together and have sex for the first time, it's a big celebration. And then after they're initiated, a girl would usually go to a boy and they would do it in a little hopping manner. They would do these little hop, hop, hop over to a boy, and the boy understood that that meant the girl wanted to have sex with him. And if the boy did not want to have that, he would just go on with his business and just kind of ignore her. So do you think the girl's feelings got hurt? No, not at all. She would hop over to the next guy. And she would keep going until she found a boy or a man who wanted to have sex with her. Now, in their view, it's like this. When you're really, really hungry and your stomach is gurgling and making noises, and you want to eat some food in order to satisfy that natural urge, okay? Well, our hormones are natural urges too. And it's natural to want to have sex and to feel sexy. And so the Maasai tribe, they treat this as a natural, God-given gift of the desire to be sexual. And so they go and find it. And, the girls are not hurt or feel rejected or anything like that. And their view of the body is very different, and I dare say much healthier than ours is. But we'll get to that later in chapter 4. That's the big one. All right, so those two tribes are unusual in the way that they do have ecstatic movement in their dance, okay? You might want to think about this idea of Western culture and its view on the body, because it's going to come back over and over and over again, and we're going to look at it closely. When you think of how our society generally hides the body and thinks negatively about nudity, and I mean, for instance, look at almost 100% of TV shows or movies. They usually have no nudity, but yet they will show killings and murder and drug addictions and all these unnatural things that bodies and people can do. But they don't show the natural body and the natural things that human bodies do. That's a little bit backwards. I mean, in Europe, you can see a lot more nudity on TV and in movies than here. But there's still a big stigma against nudity and watching sex, et cetera, in our culture, okay? But we're going to keep coming back to that because it keeps popping up. And dance, of course, is with the body. So ideas of what the body is and feels like is very important in different societies, okay? All right, I want to tell you about this one anthropologist and dancer. Her name is Pearl Primus, Primus, and this is still chapter 2, okay? And she was born in Trinidad, a Black dancer, but she moved here as an infant, and so she was brought up in New York, all right? And she was very interested in dance, so her parents put her into dance lessons. She grew up to be a professional dancer. She was actually a dancer with Martha Graham Company, a modern dance company in New York. And she would constantly ask her parents how they danced in Trinidad and different parts of the world, and especially interested in Africa. And they didn't know how to respond to her. And so she would go to the library, and guess what? There was nothing in the library about how people danced in different parts of the world. So she decided to take a small group with her and find a leader and someone to take them to Africa so that they could look for different tribes and watch how they moved and learned whether or not dance was important to them and their tribe. So she did this. Now, this was back in the 1940s, okay? So when she did this, I mean, this group was taught specific forms of protocol, ways to react if they did run into tribes. And they were told that if they came upon the tribe and the tribal people stopped what they were doing and turned around and just stared at them, that meant they were to retreat and go away. However, they came upon other tribes who would just look at them, acknowledge them, and then continue doing whatever they were doing. So in this case, it was okay to quietly sit down and just watch. All right, so they came upon this one tribe, and This tribe happened to be a group of men who were dancing some kind of ritual. And there was a very obvious leader. He had a different headset on or something. And of course, Pearl Primus was mesmerized, and she was watching and watching. And she asked her guide if it would be possible for her to go join them. And the guide said, absolutely not. Don't you dare do that. Just sit and watch and be quiet. So she continued to watch for a while. And the tribe was, the ritual dance they were doing, remember, was harmonious, very simple, very repetitive. So she was a professionally trained dancer, so she picked it up in 2 seconds, right? So finally she couldn't help herself. So she got up and ran over to the tribe and stopped them and said, in pantomime, "May I join you?" And the guide ran over and he was trying to explain to the chief that, please forgive her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She just loves dance and she's wanting to join you. So the chief kind of got a kick out of that. Who is this arrogant girl who is not from here and she thinks she knows our ritual dances and she wants to join us? Well, remember, men and women had separate roles, and she was a girl and they were guys. And so he thought it was quite arrogant of her. But at any rate, he said, all right. And he let her join them. And as they continued dancing, they were amazed at how much she knew. I mean, she knew the whole dance already because they had seen it 5 times over, right? So the chief became very bewildered at this, and he decided that this girl was a great ancestor of their tribe who had come back from the dead to teach them, new steps and ways of moving. Because when they would do a little jump halfway around, she would do a jump all the way around. And when they would do like a little kick, she would do a big kick where her leg went way over her head. And so he was mesmerized by her. And he got down on his hands and knees and he started doing la da 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 da. And so the other tribal men copied him and did that too. And he told his tribe that this was a great ancestor who had come back from the dead to teach his tribe more movement, to pray for the gods, etc., to the gods, etc. This is true. You can read it in your book in chapter 2. So the tribe, the whole group was then invited by the tribe to go back to their village. And they were introduced to everybody and they were invited to stay and watch how they lived for a few days, which they did. And then the tribal leader gave her the nickname of Little Fastfoot. And he invited her, to teach them different moves and ways of moving, which she did, just regular Western styles of movement. And then at the end of their visit, the chief would communicate, to other tribes saying, we have a great ancestor coming. You must welcome her with open arms. She is here to show us how to pray better to our gods, etc., etc. So this group ended up visiting tribe after tribe after tribe after tribe. And one tribe in the Gold Coast, down Nigeria, gave her the nickname of Omowale, which means child come back home, child that has come back home. And they were introduced and welcomed into so many different tribes that they had a wealth of information. And this is on tribes that most Westerners had no idea they even existed. And so when this group came back to America, Pearl Primus wrote a book and got it published. And it was all about dance and the movement that these different tribes did. Not only that, but how important it was to their tribes, and also the introduction of different tribes and where they were. And this was such valued information that Pearl Primus was given an honorary doctorate degree because of bringing forth all this information and really introducing Westerners into how important dance was to early tribes and even current tribes in the 40s, okay? We're gonna meet later on another dancer / anthropologist who brought great things to the world of dance. But for now, let's leave that with Pearl Primus, okay? Hi, Miss Gila. Okay, guys, let's now go on to chapter 3. And chapter 3 is pretty short. And what we're looking at is, what happened when civilizations went beyond tribal forms? How did dance evolve? Okay. Well, we're going to see that Western dance evolved as art and entertainment, while Eastern dance remained traditional and closely linked with religion and royal services and tribal rituals. All right. And we have the oldest Asian dance form known is Hindu dance. So all different Asian dance styles stem from Hindu. We have seen depictions of men and women dancing in temples, And so Hindu is the oldest dance form that we know of, the oldest organized dance form, I should say. that we know of. Okay. And although Eastern dance did not really travel to the West, later on, a lot of Western dance did travel to the East. Okay. As I said earlier, the East is fond of many Western dance styles to this day. But why aren't Westerners or why don't they like Eastern? It's not that we don't like it. It's that it's of their culture and society. And you'll find small groups like Chinese New Year, etc. You'll find small groups of Chinese people or Vietnamese people celebrating their culture with dance, but we don't all do it together, right? Okay, let me see here. Let's go on. I think that's all you need to know from chapter 3. Chapter 2 and 3 kind of merge a little bit. Okay, here it is, chapter 4, the most important chapter in the book. Why? Because it tells us and shows us who, what, where, when, and why Western dance is different than Eastern dance. What happened? Okay, why don't we have thousands and thousands of years of dances done by our ancestors? What happened there? Well, we're going to learn it in chapter 4. This is what we call in dance history the fork in the road. So if you picture, eons ago, the way the Eastern world danced, they're just going along their way, continuing their traditions, etc., etc. And before, I can't tell you without saying it away, but early on, let's say, the Western world danced the same way. They did tribal dance. They did similar things that Eastern dance did, but something happened. And the Eastern way of the world continued on its path while the Western way of the world took a deep dive way, 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 way down, where basically all the arts were stopped. So let's get into that. All right, so it starts in the Mediterranean civilization. So I'm talking about places like Babylonia, which today we call Iraq, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Okay, these 4 different countries around the continent. So think of it this way. Our Western roots come from the ancient civilizations of the Mediterranean. And you could say that, all these countries weren't built all at one time, right? So we have early Mediterranean civilization happening, and eventually those people traveled to Europe. And then France, Spain, England, all these places were created. And eventually those people traveled to America. And then, more states and North and South America started coming alive. So America is a very new country. So if we look back at our roots, our ancient roots come from the Mediterranean civilization, all right? And we're going to look at different things that they have in common and something that they do not have in common. First off, all these societies had what we call fertility rituals. The fertility rites or fertility rituals are considered the most important ritual in all these different places because it generally was about growing your food to eat in order to stay alive, okay? And if we look at Babylonia or Iraq, Their most famous ritual was called Akitu, Akitu. And once again, it was done toward the end of winter to placate to the gods, to bring sun and rain, and so that their crops could grow and they could continue to eat and survive. Okay. And we also see back in Babylonia that the early kings were, well, they considered themselves to be gods. And they announced that, and they were to be treated as gods. And well, we see even to this day that royalty is closely linked with divinity, really. You know, look how differently the royal family is treated, et cetera, et cetera. So they've always been considered close to God or higher than the normal person, right? And we also, I mentioned earlier that depictions of men and women dancing in Babylonia, in these ancient sites that were found, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to get into that a little bit too. So we see that dancing happened, all right? And now let's go to Egypt. Oh my gosh, Egypt was so interesting back then. So interesting. Their religious ideas really came from who they called a king god. He was a king first, but also considered a god. And his name was Osiris. Okay. So Osiris was a brilliant man and discovered or found ways to grow food and grow, I mean, many more things than that. He found ways to take wheat and barley and brew it to make beer. He taught his people how to take the juice of grapes and ferment it to make wine. Okay, he also taught them how to make vineyards. And, you know, before he did this, Egypt was in a state of cannibalism. I mean, people would eat dead people in order to stay alive. So this was a major, major upbringing that Osiris brought to his people. Okay. And he also taught that the Nile River was very, very sacred. And a lot of rituals happened around the Nile River. And, you know, if the Nile River did not flood the banks yearly or annually, Egypt would have been complete desert, right? But luckily, they prayed and had rituals every year for the Nile to flood the banks of Egypt so that they could grow their food and crops, etc. Okay. Another important thing that Osiris introduced to his people was the idea of law and religion. Now, there was already a sense of something greater than them, something that helped them live and introduce them. But they also had the idea of something greater existed somewhere, greater than Osiris. Okay, so they had different gods and ideas about that. And Osiris taught them that having certain rules and laws would help their society. And he implemented these rules and called them laws. And he implemented further the idea of religion, the idea of pleasing those gods that were above us or who created us. He introduced a loving, kind God and said that these gods wanted only the best for us and therefore wanted us to have law and order. And of course, that was immensely helpful to those people. No longer could you just, you know, if you were bigger than someone else and you wanted what they had on their body, no longer could you just kill them and take it. There were now laws that prohibited you and you would go to jail for that, okay? So he also introduced law and religion. And this, helped their society to grow so much faster than it would have. Okay. Now, Osiris had a sister, and her name was Isis. She was, in fact, the goddess Isis. And Isis was not only Osiris's sister, but she was also his wife. And back then, they didn't have as many people as we have, and they didn't know about inbreeding and how that might be harmful to the baby, etc. So they were both brother and sister and man and wife. Now, Isis brought her own ideas to help society, and they were the ideas of art. But it's not that art didn't exist. Of course it existed. People sang, people moved, and people were fond of that. But it was the idea of people doing it all together as one people, as a community, to commune with one another. And she was essential in this, in teaching the arts, moving the arts, including everybody in, okay? So both Osiris and Isis gave a lot to early Egyptian culture, but they also had advanced knowledge of things like astronomy, sculpture, geometry, their architecture was pretty beautiful back then. Geometry, I don't know if I said that one. But at any rate, their society advanced very quickly because of Osiris, the king god, as they called him, okay? Now, they also had a very complex system of worship, really, based on death and reincarnation. So they believed in reincarnation, and also the rise and fall of the Nile River, okay? They had fertility rituals, as did all these places. And again, men and women separated in the rituals, and women always did the rituals of fertility and birthing and sickness and health, et cetera, okay? All right, so that's Babylonia and Egypt. Let's go to Greece. Oh my God, talk about advanced civilizations. Okay, the Greeks worshipped a number of deities. They had many, many, many gods, okay, both men and women. And the different gods had different powers and attributes that they gave to them, etc. So we remember that the sun god Apollo and his sister Artemis, right? Two deities at Adelphi. And this was on the island of Delos. And Apollo was the sun god who brought the sun and heat that warmed them and grew their crops. And Artemis was, again, the goddess who gave and produced and placed upon you good health, et cetera, and to be happy and love life and enjoy creativity, et cetera. Okay, so they had many, many, many different gods. And the use of dance with the Greeks was in education and military. These kids had dance in their life from day one. It was considered essential for them, okay? And then later on in military, of course, if you had dancing, you were agile and you were a better soldier, okay? And when we look at leading Greek philosophers also, so we have Aristotle, born in 384 BC, before Christ. Well, he defined a good education as the blend of dance and music, okay? And Plato, who was born in 428 BC, He said to sing well and to dance well is to be well educated. All right. And he also said that dance teaches us agility of the body. So it teaches us health, teaches us beauty of the body, goodness of the soul, and a well balanced mind. I mean, they could see and understood that movement of the body, dance, was crucial for the growth of all parts of us: mind, body, spirit, energy, everything. It frustrates me to know that our country doesn't recognize this. It's just very frustrating. All right, so also Socrates, born in 469 BC, a little bit later, he said that those who honor the gods through dance are the best in war. All right, so all Greeks back then and philosophers, educators, they all supported dance and believed in the integrity, in other words, the integration, the merging of mind, body, and spirit together. That and only that is our full potential. Okay? Look at all the people in our country who have never done any of the arts, and they have not integrated that part of life into their being yet. And they are missing a whole lot. The arts don't just teach you about art, they teach you about life and about everything. Having studied art will, allow you to do other things much, much, much better. Okay, anyway, the Greeks really saw the arts as so esteemed, and all ages, from little toddlers to old people, enjoyed and did the arts, especially dance. All right. So arts reached such a high point in Greece during this time that no equal point has ever yet been achieved in any other society. So the Greeks were way ahead of other Mediterranean cultures of that time. Egypt was on its way, and Babylonia too was on its way. But there was nothing like the Greeks at that point in history. They excelled in the arts. They were at their pinnacle. Every single living person in Greece did the arts as part of their daily life. All right, so the Greeks too had some fertility rituals. And the first one I want to tell you about is the most important one. That one is called the Dionysus ritual. Now, it was all about fertility. It was a fertility ritual. And it was done after the goddess Dionysus. And the goddess Dionysus was known for her wild, abandoned behavior. And she was a party girl. She liked to dance and sing and drink and eat. And so, this Dionysian ritual that was performed every year, just by women, of course. Remember, all fertility rituals done just by women. It could depend on each year how long it would go. It could go from anywhere, let's say, from 2 days to 7 days, okay? And all the women came out into the streets. They cooked, they baked, they danced, they sang. And after a while, you can imagine the men got real sick of it, especially if it was a really long one. And they tried to put a stop to it, but they were unable to do that because the women were way more of offending the gods and the goddess Dionysus than they were of offending their husbands. So that ritual continued. Okay, so that was the biggest. It included all the women, all right? The second smaller ritual is simply called the fertility ritual. And this ritual was done indoors. It was done by a small group of high matrons. In other words, you know, the rich people of that society. And you had to be invited in. The place it was going to happen in was a secret. You had to have some kind of connection, you know, maybe a relative or something, to be invited into this ritual. Now, it was about the same thing. It was about celebrating growth of the crops and the beauty of life and of humans, etc. But it was done very quietly and in a secret place, all right? So the Dionysus ritual is definitely the more important one, the bigger one that we know of. All right, let me see if I got everything here. Okay, yeah, the promise of spring, etc., etc. All right, guys, now we get to the Romans. Oh, the Romans. Wait till you hear. The Romans. They stopped all this love and idea and way of being with the arts. They're the bad guys in this scenario, okay? And I'll tell you how, and I'll tell you why. So the Romans were not interested in the arts whatsoever. Their favorite thing to do was watch the gladiators in the arena, okay? They had very, very weird ideas and beliefs, and this later developed into Christianity, but I'm not going to go there for right now. We'll go there later. So they had these beliefs that their bodies, their physical bodies, were bad, and that their physical bodies held all impurities that existed and were opposite from their souls. They believed that their souls were born into this body as some kind of punishment, basically like a hell on earth, right? They believed that all that was good and happy and fun and pure was up there, not down here where their body was. And they believed that once they died, their soul would be released from their body and they would then go up to heaven or, you know, the loving, wonderful place that they believed existed. And because of this belief, their culture developed really strict, horrible rules. In other words, things like, you know, your bodies were to be used for work only. I mean, you know, they would let people till the soil and grow crops. Those were essential things because you had to survive. But you were not allowed to use your body for any kind of joyful endeavor like swimming or horseback riding, or certainly not dancing, never. And that the body held all that was evil. And they believed that you should, you know, when you eat with your body, right, your mouth. And they believed that you were to eat only what was necessary to keep you alive. So they shunned all heavier people who obviously ate more. And they even had these rules where if you were a woman who was pregnant, you were not allowed to go out into free society. You had to stay inside and hide yourself. The idea of a woman being fertile, of carrying a baby inside her, was considered evil and obscene, and they even considered the fertility word a swear word. They even considered that word bad, okay? But we do know that the Romans continued to procreate, they continued to have children, et cetera, et cetera. But it was kept hidden. It was not talked about. Sex was certainly not talked about. Now, in every culture, there's always a smaller subculture that will go against society's rules and laws. So some of you may be thinking, well, what about all these Roman orgies I heard about, blah, blah, blah. Well, this was a very small group of people, who didn't care about the laws and the rules. And they would get together and they would have sex orgies with many different people, more than one. And some groups would also have food orgies where they would eat and eat and eat and eat. And then they would go outside and throw up, come back and eat. Okay, it's a very small subculture. Most Romans did not do this. It would be like, I don't know, like say in a million years, someone looking back on our culture and learning about this group of people called gangs who went against society, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not the majority of us, okay? It's a very small subculture. So most of the Romans having this idea that the body was bad. Now you might think, well, why don't they just commit suicide so their soul can be released from this jail of a body? Well, they believed that if you do that, it was bad because that would mean your soul would immediately come right back into another person, into another baby being born, and that you would have to live this life with the body all over again. So that's why they didn't do that. But their ideas and laws were just unbelievable. So all the arts use the body. Think of them, music, dancing, architecture, painting, they all use the art, which is our body. And so the Romans were completely against the arts, completely against them, and they were not allowed. Okay, so the view of total separation now. So the Romans believed in separation between body and spirit. Look back for a second at the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Babylonians. They all incorporated and integrated the arts into their beings. And the Romans separated body and spirit. These other places recognized the body was very good and could, bring joy and creativity and fertility, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so this stopped all the arts in our Western culture. But here's what happened. The Romans, now this, you guys, I'm saying this in like 10 minutes, but you have to remember this took hundreds of years. The Romans went on to conquer the Babylonians and won. And they proceeded to teach them their beliefs of God and Christianity. Now, I have to say something about Christianity. Early Christianity danced and sang and did not believe the body was bad. It wasn't until the Romans' idea of Christianity was spread all through the Mediterranean and then eventually Europe that this idea continued. So they then went to conquer the Egyptians. And again, they preached to them and told them that what they were doing was against the gods and it was bad and it was wrong and you must not do that with your body, et cetera, et cetera. And they won. And so the Egyptians had to do what they said. They then went and conquered the Greeks. Now, when the Romans got to Greece, they were shocked at how many of the arts the Greeks did. They were shocked, and they literally believed that they were doing a good thing. The Romans believed that they were helping these people to come into God's good graces again by not using the body, the evil body. You know, they saw the Grecian ways as certainly wrong. They called them pagans. They said they know not what they do. We must bring them out of their pagan ways, etc., etc. So the Romans conquered this whole area. And for over 500 years, guys, that's a long time. For over 500 years, Western dance plummeted all over the Mediterranean and eventually Europe, etc., etc. Meanwhile, here's Eastern dance still going along its merry way. It never stopped. It still is able to teach their traditional dances to younger and younger generations, okay? But all ours stopped, completely stopped. So they believed that in order to go to heaven and be happy, you had to follow these rules and treat the body in certain ways, okay? The view of the separation of body and spirit was essential to the Romans. You know, you could get, in the early days, you would get killed. You would even get killed if you were caught dancing or singing or something like that. All right. So anything that happened before that fall was long forgotten. So we don't have any of those old traditional dances, etc. Okay, so this stunted the growth of all the arts in Western culture up to the present time. Yes, I said today, the present time. Why? Well, look around in churches. Do you see dancing happening in churches? I mean, I know that some churches have liturgical dance, but that's a very, very, very few. Most churches do not have dancing. In fact, it would be considered sacrilegious if you danced in a church, you know. Look at our idea of nudity and the body. This is where it comes from, way back there, and we're still carrying these beliefs and ideas forward. You know, when you have a teenager who has a beautiful cleavage, you know, and instead of thinking, oh, she's got beautiful breasts, what do we think? You know, oh, she must be a slut. You know, I mean, it's these things. You cannot live in this culture without somehow those things getting ingrained in you. Even if your parents didn't believe that way, they somehow get ingrained in you. Look at our movies, our TVs. They don't show the body and sex as a natural, beautiful thing. It is still hidden. It is still, you know, secretive and considered bad in a lot of ways. You guys are too young for this, but back when they had video stores, you know, they would, God forbid you wanted to watch or rent a movie with nudity or, you know, a porno movie, you would have to go back behind the black curtain where only adults were allowed. I mean, they even had a curtain covering the videos. It was ridiculous. So we can still see today that idea of our body being bad and awful and evil. And how long are we going to continue that, you know? All right, so let's see. The early Christian fathers of Christianity developed strong opposition to any kind of dance and believed that the body is the source of all impurities and therefore evil, and to dance was considered sacrilegious. So they promoted this idea too, all right? And the Christians aren't the only ones. The Jews also suffered with these ideas. If you think of Yom Kippur, a Day of Atonement, well, today it's celebrated as a very solemn, serious day, okay? Back before the Romans conquered all these areas and taught their ideas, the Yom Kippur was a big celebration of party, of life, of enjoyment. Okay, so it affected the Jews too, not just the Christians. But it's still, I mean, if you ever go to a church and watch the minister or the preacher or the priest, watch their body. Their bodies are always insinuating upward. You know, they lift up the chalice upward. They lift their hands upward, still putting forth that idea that God is only up there, not down here with us and not inside of us, but up there. If you walk into a Catholic church, you can see to this day, the stained glass windows are usually a darker color on the bottom. And as the windows get higher and higher, the colors are lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter, again insinuating that all good is up higher, that light is good, that dark is bad, it's down, you know. I mean, these ideas, these ways of moving, of being, are still current today. If you watch the choir in a Christian church, let's say a Catholic church, you're taught, because when I was a kid, I was in the choir for a while at this school called St. Mary's that we went to. I hated it because the nuns kicked our butt. But anyway, you know, in the choir, we were taught, and to this day, they still do that. You stand very still, you hold the book, you do not look left or right, you simply look forward at the conductor. And, you know, you take your eyes down to see the words if you don't know them, but you don't like drop your head and look down. You know, you stay perfectly still. It's still that idea of no movement of the body. Whereas you go, it's like if you move, you're offending God or something. I mean, you know, that's one way it's still continuing, that idea. Go to a Baptist church. Watch the people with God inside them. Watch them dancing and singing and shouting for joy and really feeling that celebration, you know. Now they're breaking boundaries. They are being godly. You know, they're not thinking God is separate from us and way up there somewhere and that we're evil. Okay. All right, let's see. Let me see. I think we're almost done. Oh yeah, the Romans thought they were protecting the Mediterranean people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But even in early, from the 10th century, Pope Patrick John III excommunicated anyone who sang or danced, all right? So Christianity, the Romans' idea of Christianity, grew to the dominant form of religion and was spread all over the place, just spread. The ideas of the Romans' beliefs was spread all over the place and taught that their bodies were bad. Okay. Christian leaders prohibited dance in most places, etc. Not just like in church, but in public festivals or just for fun, you weren't allowed to do that either. Okay. So Western religious authorities, when you think of religious anything in this time period, remember that religion and the arts did not mix. okay, for the most part. So Western religious authorities are the reason and the cause of Western dance moving in a different and opposite direction as Eastern dance. Okay, that's very important. We call that the big fork in the road of why are we so different. Okay, even today, the idea of dancing in a church does sound sacrilegious. Not many churches have that, etc. All right, let's go forward a little bit. So we have over 500 years, and let's now start into chapter 5. All right. Let's look at, let's say, go back to the 8th century, and we have, you know, a time period when there is a little resurgence of dance and the arts, just a little bit. And people would never do this in public, but what they found was people, you know, for instance, they would go to a graveyard in the middle of the night when they just felt like they had to move their bodies, or they wanted to sing or paint or do something, that they had to do that in secret. So they would go to a graveyard, or ironically behind a church in the middle of the night, and they would dance and they would move. And sometimes these people were caught. And if they were caught, they were killed. This was in the 8th century. And there were 3 different names for people who expressed themselves in this way. One was trance dance. The people believed that people that behaved this way were in some kind of trance and they didn't know any better, but they just did it, okay? Another word is dance mania. People believed that people that did that were crazy, that they maybe were possessed by the devil and the devil was making them do it, etc., etc. And then the third word is called dance macabre. That's M-A-C-A-B-R-E. Macabre is the French word for death. And that means the people thought that those people were trying to commit suicide, or, you know, they were doing the dance of death, because if they got caught, they were killed. All right. Now, what we're going to see starting in the 8th century is a resurgence of the arts. You cannot suppress the arts. It is part of us. It is part of every one of us. And you are denying yourself something major if you do not participate in the arts. Now, I don't mean every single art form, but, you know, at least a couple of them. All right, so we're at the 8th century. We see a little bit of resurgence, and again, it's suffocated and pushed back down by the people, and those people are killed. The 9th century, we see that it comes a little bit higher, and the higher each point gets, that means the more people are doing it. But again, it's suppressed and pushed back down. The 10th century, a little bit more, a little bit higher, repressed, pushed back down. The 11th century, the highest yet, more people are doing it. Again, pushed back down. Creates 2 groups of people. The arts are bad, no, the arts are good, you know. The 12th century, the highest yet. Again, it's pressed back down. Now, not so low, though, as before. And then finally, we have the 13th century, where the arts come higher than ever before. And now at this point, all people are doing the arts, and they're dancing, and it's not considered a bad thing. And then let's say here's the 13th century, okay? And now the arts, once again, are embraced, and now the Western world goes along its route of having arts in their culture. But we still don't have those traditional old traditions that the Eastern world has, because, we lost over 500 years. So how can you pass forward something you don't know, right? Oh my gosh. All right. So let's talk about chapter 5 is all about folk dance. And this is the time period when dance, starts to come back. Okay, so eventually more and more people danced, that the churches, the fathers could not control it. The, mayors, police, governors, whoever could not control it. So they couldn't control it outside, but they still could control it in their churches, and it was still not allowed in churches, okay? So the first people that started to dance and more joined them were peasants. These were, common poor people who worked in the fields, and after a day of work, they might get together, hang out at the fountain, and just dance. And these dances are called folk dances, F-O-L-K, okay, folk dances. And folk dances are very similar to harmonious dances, but they're happening at a different time period. So that's why there's a different word for them, all right? So folk dances, they're natural, they're low to the ground, they're repetitive, they're stomping, shuffling, very similar to tribal dance and harmonious dance, but happening many years later. So called folk dances. The poor folk did them, all right? Now the aristocrats, meaning royal family members and rich people, still would never dance. You would never catch them dancing. Oh my, that was just something stupid that the poor people did, okay? So it took a while for the rich, for high society to get on board, yeah? All right, so folk dances, the definition of folk dances. Folk dances come from the rituals of early man, where his life was based on the success of the 4 seasons, all right? Even the same reasons that they're dancing are the same as tribal harmonious dance. So folk dances come from the rituals of early man, where his life depended on the success of the 4 seasons. So they would dance together and pray for sun and rain. They would dance together at harvest and celebrate, all right? So Christian churches still waged war against the arts, especially dancing and folk dancing. And they said that open references to fertility were obscene. And they said that every stomp, leap, and hop was a jump toward hell, and it was against God, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. But it got to a point, 10th, 11th century, where so many people were enjoying it and doing it, they were no longer afraid of these priests who would lecture on this kind of stuff. And they were afraid more of offending their God than the priest, okay? So they continued to do it. All right. Now, here's the thing. Folk dances developed differently from region to region. So now the Mediterranean civilization has moved and conquered Europe. And we have folk dances happening in Spain, in France, in Italy, and England. And the dances were different, but they still had those familiar characteristics. So remember I said about tribal dance, you could take the movement from a tribe in New Zealand and the movement from a tribe in Africa, And you could see similarities. They were all natural, low to the ground, kept simple, kept repetitive on purpose so everybody could join in. It was about togetherness and communing. It wasn't a show. It wasn't about showing off or performing. Okay. Well, this is true of folk dances too. So you saw those same qualities. Let's see, many of you have maybe heard of the maypole dance at the end of winter, beginning of spring. This is an original folk dance from France. And what they would do is they would have a big pole with a bunch of ribbons coming down from the pole. And the little kids each would take a ribbon and they would dance around the maypole. And this is a welcoming of spring, all right? Now, just to be clear, today there do exist many professional folk dance companies. Now, these are not those easy, repetitive dances. Professional folk dance companies, if you have to be trained to be accepted. I mean, these dances are hard, wicked hard. So, it just developed further into a profession. But in Europe, folk dances still happen all the time. It saddens me that those Europeans that came to America didn't bring those folk dances with them, because we don't do folk dance, as a group, really, not today anyway. All right, let's see. So they developed differently from region to region, but still had those common denominators. All right. Now, here's what starts to happen. By the late 1200s, 1300s, aristocrats start getting interested in dance. Now, sometimes for fun, they'll imitate what they saw the peasants doing, that kind of thing. But it's very hard for them, for the aristocrats, in the way that they had to dress, etc. So now there's a deep interest, and the rich people want to move and dance too. But how can they? Think of times like during the Renaissance. Think of like women would have these gowns on where they couldn't get dressed themselves. They had to be tied into a tight corset. Then they would have this big, like, frame thing attached to them that would hold their gown out, or their dress. And then they would have what was called a chestboard, which was a hard piece of some kind of light wood that was built into the dress that did not show your bosom, okay? And then they might have some kind of tall, stiff white collar that lifted the head up like this. And everything was very stiff and lifted up. So same thing with the men. The men would have white ruffled shirts where the cuff would hang out of the suit coat, and they might have this gold suit coat, and the ruffle shirt hanging out of it off the wrist. And they would often wear knickers, and they would often wear tights. And the men back then wore high heels too. They weren't like spiked heels, but they were like thick 2-inch heels, and with buckles on them or something. So it was hard, here are the peasants with loose, comfortable clothing because they had to do physical work. And they're able to be natural, get down. But if you're dressed like that, you cannot get down with those peasants. There's no way you can do that kind of dancing. So what did they do? Well, they inquired as to who among those dancers were considered very good dancers. And they then invited them up to the royal palace or the rich man's mansion. And they told that dancer that they wanted them to create a dance especially for them that they could do with their clothing, etc. So these men that taught the aristocrats how to dance were called dancing masters. And what they did was they took the folk dance that the peasants did, and they basically changed them in ways where the rich people could enjoy them and do them with their restrictive clothing. All right. So, you take something like the minuet, where the peasants are just bit bopping to it, And so the dancing master would take that and he would change it. I can't stand up or you won't be able to see me, but they would change it to, maybe I'll squat down, to where they became steps like this. Bum, ba, ba, da, bum, ba, bum, ba, ba. And you would move very slowly, and everything was done more carefully, etc., etc. And more and more and more aristocrats and rich people started to get interested in this. And the continued interest refined the movement more and more and more and more. And now, by the end of the 1300s, it was at a point where to gain a place in high society, you had to be a good dancer, especially men. And you had to know how to dance. So now, dance is considered not an attribute, but something you had to know if you were an upper class citizen, right? And so all these rich people hired dancing masters just to keep their families, learning all the latest dances, et cetera, et cetera. And they kept refining them to the point where you would have to study long and hard to do these dances well. So you couldn't just step and lift your arms, step and come down. You had to learn to slightly bend your knee and drop your head a little bit. And you had to lift up, not with your shoulders, but just with your arms, and then come down and lean over. I mean, you could tell the difference between quote unquote good dancers and not so good dancers or sloppy dancers. And it became so important to kings, to queens. Now, it was definitely something more important for men to know than women, although women still learned as well. But let's say the king has 6 men, right? 3 on the left, 3 on the right. Those 2 that are closest to the king are considered the most important. But if either of those men made a mistake in dance, they were sent to the end of the line, and they had to work on their dancing and become good at it again to get closer and closer and closer. So dance was, and not just dance, but the other arts too, were now considered high achievements and good things in society. And it was also an opening for poor people to gain a place in high society. So no longer was it about your bloodline or, where you were born, et cetera, et cetera. But if you were a very, very good dancer, you were given a place in high society. Same as if you were a good painter, singer, musician, et cetera, et cetera. So the arts are now, by the end of the 1300s, in full force, considered wonderful and beautiful. But now we have the dancing that was done by high society. That was called court, C-O-U-R-T, court dancing. And that's because it most often happened in the king's court, all right? And if you look at some of those dances, let me see if I can imitate. I want you to look at what you think these court dances grow into. So you have all this regalness happening. You have all this refined movement that takes years and years and years to do. And what does it look like? Well, I hope you guessed ballet because, yes, it eventually developed into classical ballet. All right, that's where it came from. The court dances of the Middle Ages, of the Renaissance era, basically. All right. So, very interesting. All right, let me see here if I got everything in. Okay, by the 1300s, folk dancing was enjoyed by everybody. Although when the rich people did it, it was called court dancing of that day. Okay. Now, when we get further on in history with the birth of ballet, and we look back on this time period of court dance, we're going to give it another name. And it's going to be called pre-classic. So court dance and pre-classic dance are the same thing. The difference is if you lived during that time period, you called it court dance. But if you lived way after ballet was born, you look back and call that pre-classic because it was previous to classical ballet. All right. So you have folk dance, court dance, or pre-classic dance, and then you have classical ballet dance. All right. All right. So these dancing masters taught the upper class to dance with chivalry and pride, and of course, a lot of it was because of the way they were clothed, etc. All right, yes. So these court dances, people didn't travel back then very much at all. And the people that did travel were royal family members or soldiers of royal kingdoms. And they would bring with them the current dances of that royal kingdom of the time. And so these court dances spread from court to court to court to court. All right. So that is the end of chapter 5. And next week we will do chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right. And you will find the quiz under quizzes. Okay. So complete the quiz after the lecture, because a lot of the answers will be from the lecture and the book too, but mostly the lecture. All right. If you have any questions, just, post something in the discussions or email me. And don't forget, your week's work is to take notes on this lecture and first read chapters 1 to 5, complete the quiz, watch any links that I add. Sometimes I won't add a link, sometimes I will. Okay. Today I might add one. I might add one showing what folk dance looked like. Okay, by the peasants. Post a comment in the discussion forum. All right. It can be anything, what you thought, or you like this chapter the best because blah, blah, blah. Or you can just comment on someone else's posting, okay, but at least one per week. Then you are going to submit one written page, and here is your question. My personal connection to dance. So what I'm asking you is, has dance been in your life at all? And if so, in what way has it been in your life? Okay. If it hasn't been, that's fine. Just write your real history. All right. How dancing has been or not been in your life. All right, guys. Have a great week. God bless. And I will see you soon. Bye-bye.